Welcome to the Rant Live. Hey, I know it's only been a couple days. We were just saying, we did our last show on Friday. So, man, just a couple days and everybody gets us back again.
Yeah, well, it was weird, because the Friday with the Cubs kind of having that split series, it's just kind of strange. Because does it feel like were they going for a sweep yesterday? I guess it would have been a sweep even if it was a 2-game series, but it was. There's just such a distinct difference between the hype and the vibe of Thursday's Field of Dreams game, and then you have the day off, and then it's like, yay, 2 games back in Cincy. Woo! So
yeah, it's like the Thursday game felt special. It felt almost like a playoff game kind of environment, right? Where it was kind of like a lot of attention on the day and national media attention and stuff like that. And you remember the playoffs, right?
Let's see.
It's been a while.
Yes, I recall. I was, and I was in attendance at the Cubs' most recent postseason game. Not that I'm really proud of that fact. It was probably the most forgettable. Actually, let's see.
That was the Marlins. And
have I been okay? So I was in 2020 against the Marlins. Yeah, with Darvish pitching. I was in one of the rooftops there, which was it was wonderful. Courtesy of Red Bull. Shout out to Red Bull. Thanks, folks. So yeah, it was unfortunate, but then I'm trying to think of the last, because the Cubs haven't won a playoff game in a long, long time. Right? It was 2017 against the Dodgers. What was it? Game 4? Was that game 3, game 4, whichever? Jake Arrieta is the last pitcher to win a playoff game for the Cubs, and it was in that Dodgers series, as I recall. And
series of Cubs really, I felt, should have won, but that John Lackey, bringing in John Lackey out of the bullpen was
Justin
terrible
Turner just crushed him there, because that was
the Cubs were right there. It was a tie game. If they could have won that game, it would have changed the whole series.
Well, yeah, because then it was that, and then that that 18 season when they just stumbled through, and then it was like having to play game 163, and then having that crap.
Well, they got overtaken by the Brewers. Remember, they played terrible down the stretch.
One run, that was where it really started. I think that's when we really noticed about the offense breaking, right? And as we lead into all that, and it was that, and they just couldn't score runs down the stretch, and then they couldn't beat the Rockies, and then it was like 19 they didn't make it, and then 20. They bounced back in the short season. Obviously, we know what happened last year. So I was not at the game in 18, but in 2 of their last 3 playoff appearances, I was at the final game of the season. So I don't know if I should attend any more Cubs postseason games, because it generally, and actually, I have seen the Cubs in the playoffs.
You were at the World Series, though, and they
twice. Nope, they lost both games I went to. The last four Cubs playoff games I've been to, they have lost. So that is
not your fault. I promise.
That's part of the reason I didn't go. I told myself I wouldn't go to Game 7 because they would lose, because Kluber had started 1-4, and those are the games I went to, and I was like, I can't go because I need them to win. So there are certain cases in which I actually do get a bit stitious, just a little stitious, not superstitious, but a little stitious. So I don't know though. I mean, lately I haven't had to worry about postseason games. Hopefully that'll change here before.
True. Yeah. Unfortunately, we had to take that short walk down memory lane. How about Fernando Tatis? Before we get into anything, suspended for 80 games, going to stretch into next season. His GM and fellow players kind of dogpiling him. This has a feeling of like it either everything changes for him when he gets back, or who knows, right?
Well, and there was a whole thing, and let's remember the reason he hasn't played all season is because he broke his wrist riding his motorcycle, right? And so the organization, I think a lot of his teammates were already kind of down on that and disappointed in him for that. And now you've got this, so the dude's going to miss the entire season. And he's only 23 years old. Like, that's, I mean, we could go a couple different ways with this, and I think when I wrote about it, like I'm kind of, I don't really care if guys juice. That doesn't bother me, but rules are rules. And it's also wild to me. I mean, I have to assume that part of that is, again, you break your wrist, you're not able to do stuff with it. You've lost some strength. You're looking for a way to accelerate that. I'm assuming that's where this comes from, right? Not ringworm. I love, like he says, it was for ringworm. Now, I have some thoughts on that, but it's at 23 years old. I know you and I don't remember that very well because we're talking 2 and 3 decades away, respectively. But I remember, so I've got a hamstring. I pulled my hamstring like a month ago, right? And it'll kind of get better. And then the moment I do anything beyond like a brisk walk, it just tweaks again, right? It just does. You don't heal very quickly. But when I was 23, it was like you could break your leg. And then, a week later, I mean, I'm exaggerating, of course, but especially like muscle pulls and things like that, but just injuries in general, like you heal faster, you don't feel as best. So I'm like, 23 years old. And here's the thing. I get it, especially when we talk about the guys back in the day who were really juicing. You're saying, hey, it's late in my career. The money's getting huge. I need one more good season to get that last big contract, or I need to be able to hang on. He's 23 and he already signed this massive. He doesn't need to make more money. The only thing he can do is cost himself money by taking this stuff, right? Like, you already have a $340 million deal. What? Why are you juicing? Why would you risk that? That's the part that to me is just speaks to him being a complete knucklehead, because it's just stupid. Like there's nothing at all to be gained from it at all.
Yeah.
And I think that's what his teammates and the the organization's saying. It's stupid. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty crazy to see that, but I just wanted to squeeze that in real quick before we get into the Cubs, which, looking at the Cubs, especially since the All-Star break, but even since the trade deadline, I mean, and we talked about this on Friday, they're really playing well. Thursday they won 4-2. Saturday they win 7-2. Franmil Reyes, who's been really a surprise, coming on for the Cubs, playing well since he was picked up after being DFA'd. Who was he DFA'd by?
The Guardians.
And then Reyes, Happ, and Contreras all go deep on Saturday. And then Sunday, it was weird. It was like Thompson was pitching well, I mean, for a very short period of time. And then the rain came, and you could tell the rain was bothering him. And you could see when he was throwing his pitches, they were all his release. He was just releasing the ball a little bit too early, and it was coming in high every single time. And so I'm surprised I mean, I don't know what you do in that situation as an umpire, because it didn't seem like it was going to rain for long. It was clearly impacting the pitcher. You don't want to stop the game necessarily, but it's weird when the umpire had to notice that was happening. And then once that happened, it just seemed like he got thrown all off his game completely and just kind of fell apart, lost his control, and just didn't have it, and left after 1 2/3 innings.
Yeah, and I think there's something in there too, because that second inning that he was trying to complete. I mean, I don't know how many pitches he ended up getting to, but I know that's something organizationally the Cubs have looked at.
70 pitches, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, at least. So I think he was. I don't know if he was at 35 in that second one, but one of the things they do, and if you listen to somebody
ended with 70.
Okay. And I think he was at 35. Well, it might have been 35 in each of them. It might have been close. I don't know. But that's pretty wild to have gotten to that point.
Yeah.
And so, if you listen to, I know the Cubs organizationally do this, where I believe the mark is 30. If you reach 35 pitches in an inning, you do not see a new batter after that point, right? So if you reach that in that at bat and hopefully finish it, but Tom House, renowned throwing coach. Again, a lot of Cubs fans love to talk about Mark Pryor and the towel drills, and this is that was a long time ago, but still, specifically with youth pitching, why do people call him Rossi, R-O-S-S-I? This is a comment on this. R-O-S-S-Y. I don't get it. It's not Martini and, right? It's not a liquor, vermouth.
Evan is referring to the comments that we received.
ROSSY.
Turn that. Remember how I showed you could turn that off?
Just like when people say Javi, Javi. It's Javy. Anyway, to where, especially with youth pitchers, if you reach 30 pitches in an inning, you should be done because you've hit muscle fatigue, right? Muscle failure. And so at that point, you're going to start recruiting muscles and start to alter your mechanics to continue to throw. And it's just not healthy. Similarly, I mean, that same thing can happen. Obviously, you're not as concerned with the developmental aspect of it, physically developmental, right? Because kids and then grown adults are different. But if you're having to go 35 pitches in an inning, it's pretty clear you're laboring through that. And I think what you also have to consider is like that it's not the number of pitches alone. It's when you're in that high pressure situation, you're putting runners on base, you're not throwing strikes. There is a higher physical toll that those pitches and mental toll that those pitches take. So I'm glad they were able to just get him out of there, hopefully let him reset. Because obviously, and they were noting it on the broadcast too. I mean, Sutcliffe was talking about it, just as you said there, the rain messing with him. And so it was tough to watch though, man, because he's been so good. And then to see, oh, Jesus Christ. Sorry, we should do that thing where I click on this and I don't see the comments as they come up because it's just foolish. But no, I was glad they got him out of there. It stinks, but every once in a while, to me, what's more important is what does it look like the next time out? What are the things that he's able to do in that next start? Because you're always going to have those blow-ups. Once in a while, it's just going to happen. So how do you bounce back from it?
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of there wasn't a lot you could do about it, and the bullpen wasn't great either. Espinoza, not great, and so Espinoza, Rucker, and Castro, all guys that pitched yesterday, don't feel like any of those guys are going to be part of the future. I mean, maybe Rucker, who knows? But looking forward, there's a lot to be excited about. I think. I don't know. It's encouraged about maybe. I mean, since the break, the Cubs have been really, really good, and we talked about it on Friday. But just from both sides, right, offense and pitching, they've been really good. I mean, the defense needs to be better. We know that, but outside of that, the things that we know that are obvious, what you'd expect to see from a team that's in the position that they're in right now. They could have folded, and they trade 3 or 4 relievers and have still been pretty good. I mean, their bullpen has a 3.6 ERA since the deadline, but a 2.63 ERA since the break. And I mentioned since the deadline because obviously they traded away a bunch of guys there. The starters have a 3.3 ERA since the break and a 3.94 since the deadline. Now, of course, Thompson's outing yesterday didn't help, but it didn't necessarily hurt either because he wasn't that long. So, I mean, everyone's been good. I am a little concerned about Seiya Suzuki, though. He's been really struggling badly. Like he looks completely lost to the plate.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something. He kind of went through that earlier in the season too, right? Yeah. It's like right before he got hurt, kind of in there, because he got that really hot start, and I think pitchers figured a few things out about him, and then when he came back, right, it was like it's been like the same thing in 2 different splits, right? He got really hot and then fell off, and then he takes that break for a while, then he gets really hot coming out of it, hit that homer, and they talked about it, his homer and then the one Hap hit the other day were the second and third furthest pitches off the plate this year that were hit for home runs, if that makes sense. It was like the one Suzuki hit was like 10 inches off the inside of the leg. It was wild. It would have hit him, right? He turns on it. And that was one of my favorite things is like when I put that out there, like, how did he hit this for a home run? And then I got a lot of actual earnest answers. Like, well, he just turned on it. Like, yeah, no shit. It was a rhetorical question, folks. You're not supposed to hit that pitch for a home run. But I'm concerned as well because it's not as if they're facing a ton of aces lately either. They're not running through. They've faced some decent pitchers here and there, but the Reds aren't running anybody out there who you're like, oh crap, we got to face this guy again, right? I mean, they got rid of Castillo. Yeah, so I'm concerned. I hope that a lot of this gets turned around, that he figures it out and can adjust back. And I think for some of that, it's just a mental thing. Hopefully he can string a couple of hits together and maybe that'll help. But yeah, not fun right now for him.
No, and so and the fact that it's happened twice is kind of where I come off. If it was just something that had happened once, but it's like it's almost the exact same thing, like you mentioned, right? It's like he started off so hot, coming back from the injury, and at the beginning of the season, and then he runs into this where he's clearly struggling, and yesterday he just looked really bad, and I don't know. He's 14 for 82 since the All-Star break. That's a 171 batting average, 3 home runs, 3 doubles, 21 strikeouts versus 4 walks.
Ugh.
So it's just like, yeah, I'm a little concerned about that. It's you feel like he's got the skill set to be able to figure it out, but I don't know. And the Cubs signed him to a 5-year deal, and so it's just like, I don't know. What do you think? You think he figures it out, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think he can. I know it's there is. Well, it was interesting because right or wrong, largely for the wrong reasons, because they're both Japanese players, so although there is there are some dynamics of the game in Japan that I don't want to say are universal, but that are a bit more common. You do see a stance where generally there's the bat is held a little higher, and you see kind of the move toward first base, right? We knew that with Ichiro, we saw that a lot, where it's kind of that softball slash hitting, right, where you're dragging with you, and we saw that from Kosuke Fukudomi. And the reason I bring that up is because Marquis was showing, I think it was Saturday during the day. They had like a replay of a Cubs-Cardinals game from 2008. So Kosuke Fukudomi was in there, and they were talking about how, there's a while where he was struggling that season. And certainly he had some sort of, a lot better overall than I think people give him credit for, but about how, Lou Piniella wanted him to, quote unquote, like Americanize his game a little bit, which again was not pulling, and part of the reason Suzuki was able to get to that pitch. Now he wasn't going toward first base, but he was opening up and pulling off the pitch to be able to get that thing so far inside. And it does seem like he's getting beat a lot of times on pitches right down the middle or outer half, not necessarily balls that he's chasing, but that he's pulling off of them enough and just missing them. Like, I don't see him. Sometimes he's getting fooled badly, but every hitter does. I mean, with as good as the pitching is. So I think there may be some things that, again, it's just going to take him a little while to adjust. I do believe he's got the skill set. If you look at the numbers he put up, he was a better hitter in Japan than Shohei Ohtani was. Now, again, we're talking about a freak on one side and a different profile of hitting. But I do think that Suzuki, given a bit more time and the ability to adjust and just acclimate, the process for him is certainly different from what it would be from maybe another hitter who's coming in and again, didn't have to move to an entire new country and deal with language and cultural barriers and that sort of thing. So it's going to take him some time, but I think he'll be okay.
Yeah, and then you've got another struggling player, Raphael Ortega. Like, he's just been, not great. 189 since the break. Hasn't really been great all season. And he really, in the Red Series, I don't think he started at all. I think he came in as a pinch hitter a couple of times, so he only has 2 at-bats in the series. But it feels like the Cubs are kind of getting away from Raphael Ortega. Do you think he sticks with the team for the rest of the year, or do you think he's gone?
Maybe the rest of the year, but I would be shocked if he's back next year, given the 40-man implications that we see with a lot of these guys. And that's where, so I get, when we talk about not trading Wilson Contreras and Ian Happ, right? And I as much as I still think if Happ's one thing, but if Contreras leaves, right, we might view that non-transaction differently in hindsight. But I have greater concern for the fact that they weren't able to move those fringy players, right? If we talk about Smiley, Miley, who was hurt, Ortega, Wisdom, right? Guys like that who had and Ortega's value was dropped. Like we're talking player to be named later, cash considerations type move at that point, right? Because there's just not. But as it is, you now have a guy who is taking up a spot on your 40-man roster and your active roster. He's not making much money, so that's not that big a deal. But if you can't even play that guy relatively frequently because you have other Nelson Velasquez and Chris Morel in particular, and now you've got Reyes, who again is going to be able to play. Now he's not a left-handed batter, Reyes that is, so not quite the same. But yeah, it's tough because you just have a guy taking up space, and he's falling into that kind of David Bodie, Frank Schwindel realm, right? Where it's like, man, he looked really good for a while, and you're sitting there thinking, boy, this would be such a nice fit because it's such a right-handed heavy outfield, having that lefty out there with a little bit of pop who can pick it out there in the field. But boy, he's just he's a guy, and you can do with outfielders coming up.
Power,
yeah.
And if he's not getting on base, then there's really no saving grace there.
And that's kind of one of the tough things, right? Where again, I think it's just they're playing out the string. It's in a similar fashion. Again, they've made some room with some other guys, but I know how badly they wanted it to work out with him because he can provide that bat and capably handle an outfield spot. But with all these guys they've got coming up and with all the decisions they have to make, he just seems like one of the most expendable. There's a few, right? But when we look at the position players, and there's not like, what's the upside there? Where
I don't think there is any.
Yeah, there's really not much because you can't sit there and
he's an older guy. What is he, like 32 years old, 31,
yeah,
32?
He's not, if he was, 5+ years younger, then maybe you look at it and say, yeah, he just hadn't gotten a shot. He gets every day. Like there's no significant upside, particularly in light of the rest of the decisions. And again, that's why they finally moved on from Hayward, right? Because they knew they were going to need that 40-man spot moving forward. Mm-hmm. Not so much this year. So I do feel like it's just kind of, for lack of a better term, they're playing out the string or letting him mail it in down the stretch, and they'll use him when they have to. And I have to imagine he's gone at season's end.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about the Franmil Reyes edition? We just touched on him earlier, but coming from Cleveland, a guy who he was decent last year, didn't really got off to a slow start. I'm not really sure what the whole situation was there with Cleveland and why they were attempting to shuffle him down. I guess they were trying to get him through waivers and get him back down to AAA. But he's looked really good since he's been with the Cubs. He's got at least one home run, double yesterday. He's a guy that
RBI hit his first game, I think.
Yeah.
He's
got a hit in every game. He's got
the first thing is he's a big dude. You know what I mean? Like he reminds me of Big Papi. In a way, just kind of, and he's got that sort of presence too, right? Like people want him around. But I have some interesting. It was between him and we've seen, Zach McKinstry got off to a really slow start, but we've seen him kind of collect some hits here. Had a nice double the other day. I'm interested in something because obviously the Cubs have, they've got Johnny Washington who's familiar with them. I think Andy Green was the manager in San Diego when Reyes was out there. Carter Hawkins was in Cleveland with him. So there's a lot of guys who have some familiarity, and I know a big part of the reason, like he's a great clubhouse presence. Well, what did you just lose in Jason Hayward, right? Of course, he could still, I suppose, stick around a little bit as a clubhouse presence. Who knows? Now, the issue with Ortega or Reyes is that he's a right-handed batter, and his defense leaves a bit to be desired, and they're okay defense-wise. So, I think occasional corner outfield duty. Weak side platoon guy, especially if you have somebody like Matt Mervis eventually come up, I think maybe that works out pretty well. But what's interesting to me, so Elise Menaker did a little spot from her sideline duty, and they're showing the work that he's putting in on site, watching on the iPad, checking out the swing, helping Chris Morrell on that side of thing, working with Washington on those things, and looking into that stuff and studying some changes he can make. And we heard about McKinstry making some changes as well. And I'm interested in that because we see a lot of this on the pitching side. We know that we talk a lot more about the pitching infrastructure on some tweaks that are being made. And if we have time, I'm interested to see what happens with Max Bain, who's out in Arizona now. He's been put on the development list. I think to make some tweaks. Well, I know to make some tweaks there, right? We've seen some things like with Cam Sanders and some other guys who have come back from stints on the development list with new pitches, new all sorts of things. But what's interesting to me is you've got a guy like Reyes he's got 2 30-plus home run seasons. He's obviously a big dude, tons of power, good dude in the clubhouse. But how is it that another professional organization couldn't look at that swing and say, gee, here are some things that we think could work with you, that you could tweak, that we could make this better, and we could help you get back to where you were. But the Cubs see that and go in, and same thing with McKinstry, right? Like he noted, like there were a few things there, and these are pretty basic things, right? And I just wonder about this in general. Is it largely a question of simply perhaps being too familiar with a player as an organization, or whether there's a certain organizational philosophy or the philosophy of the hitting instructors who were there at the time? I saw some very interesting stuff about the Tigers, some negative things they've done in terms of vertical bat angle and how it's dropped for every one of their hitters, which is not ideal given the numbers involved. But again, it's too big for someone like me to probably explore. But I was interested in that because it's just wild to me that at the highest level of the game, we talked about the things Joey Votto said at the Field of Dreams game, that their existing team would not have the focus on that, or would be willing to literally give up on a guy who has that kind of power. And then he gets to the Cubs and they're like, oh, how about we try to do this, this, and this? And that kind of unlocks something. I don't know if that makes sense where I'm going with it, but I just thought that was a very interesting thing.
It is. I mean, obviously, it's still a small sample size, but I mean, just since he's joined the Cubs, he's batting .353 with a .353 on base percentage, which is interesting.
No walks.
Yeah, and coincidentally enough, since he first played on August 9th, Zach McKinstry also .353 with a .353 on base percentage. Identical.
But McKinstry started off pretty slow too. I mean, he
didn't have a hit for like 3 or 4 games.
Yeah, and a lot of people are like, oh man, what a crappy trade. But I mean, sometimes I think though it is actually easier, and I don't want to say like other organizations are the giants, but like you say, standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Because somebody else has already done all this work, and you're kind of coming in there, but I do think sometimes it's easier to look somewhere else because you don't have the bias or the preconceived notions about that player, whether it's because you haven't worked with them at all or you haven't seen much of them. And then to break that down, I think becomes a little bit easier. Or, and particularly if a player's already having success, then, you don't really need to tweak things. But that's been kind of a pet hobby of mine, over the last several years since my son kind of started getting a little more serious in baseball, and obviously with our site, and kind of breaking some of this stuff down. I thoroughly enjoy looking at swings and kind of breaking down some of those mechanics and looking at some things. So just as an example, Alexander Canario is a player who, he was on fire last year, and I think he's a great example of that because he's been in the organization now part of, the last half of last year after the trade and then this full season. And if you look at the numbers he's putting up, right, he's always had a ton of power, but he had a ton of swing and miss. He had a lot of issues, especially with outside pitches. And you can see where it was like, okay, the Cubs wanted to let him do his thing last year, see what they had with that. And he hit a ton of home runs in a row, but again, there were some holes in there. And now you see what he's doing this year. And if you compare last year's swing to this, there are some obvious differences. I was actually alerted to it. I know Brian Smith over at Bleacher Nation wrote a bit on that, and I had tweeted some stuff to him. And, in response, he had a side-by-side video, and some of those quotes were included in the piece. I didn't even realize it was out there. It was like from a month or a couple weeks ago. But it's interesting to see those changes in effect. And I actually looked back on it. I looked at something I wrote last year. I was like, I think he needs to fix this, this, and this. And then I forgot that I written it. And then I looked at the swing last year, and I was like, huh, holy shit. he did this and this and this. And I'm not saying that the Cubs looked at what I wrote and were like, oh, this is obviously they arrived at the same conclusions. Right? Hey, hold on. No. Justin Stone was reading Cubs Insider and was like, oh, yeah, it's a good idea.
You never know.
Who knows? It could be. But again, I think that's that situation where you have someone coming into your organization fresh and you can make some of those tweaks. And Pete Crow Armstrong, another one, right? I am very, very encouraged by the things I see with what this organization has been able to identify and correct in some of these hitting weaknesses, because we do talk so much about the pitching and the pitch lab and the things they're doing there. But I'm at least as encouraged by the improvements I see on a hitting side. Again, if Reyes could bat from the left side, I'd really enjoy that, because it limits him a bit. And I think positionally, he is sort of that DH guy, and they've got a few of those elsewhere. But no, it's been really cool to see. And I think if nothing else, like at least these are some guys who are coming in, and it's a different look, right? It's a different. It's not the prospects that we're seeing come up, but at least it's a new face and somebody different to kind of get on.
Yeah, exactly. So
I'm just showing my hat. There's a question on there.
That's Myrtle Beach Pelicans there.
Yep, just a new era. It's their pirate collection.
Evan showing his Myrtle Beach Pelicans hat. They've got some sweet gear. Yeah,
the Pelicans do probably, not even probably. They're far and away. And I've been. Listen, I still haven't been to Des Moines, where the S's are silent, but the city is buzzing.
You've never been to Des Moines in your life?
I don't think so. I mean,
wow. Because you're not that far away, are you?
Like 7 hours, 8 hours, something like that. So it's a bit of a hike, but it's not much farther than Tennessee. But I've been down to see the Smokies 3 times. Been to South Bend before, been to Myrtle a couple times. But Myrtle Beach has by far the best merch. Like, it's not even close. Just between the different logos that they do.
Their marketing team is just strong.
Yeah, they do a very, very good job down there. And so I have to give them credit. And it was I was down there. Ryan Moore, who's their GM, I was down in his office a couple years ago and saw this, like the Pelicans pirate flag hanging on his wall. I was like, oh, that's so cool. He was like, guess what? We're turning this into, like, so I knew about it before this stuff was starting to launch. And so when this thing came out, I was able to pre-order it, but I've got I think 4 different Pelicans hats, 5 actually, I believe. So that's like, I just, and it's a struggle for me not to buy more of their stuff, but not to digress.
Personal struggle to not buy more of their stuff. That's when a marketing department's doing their job.
Yeah, when you're just like, oh, I gotta have that. Boop.
So looking at the future for the Cubs, the Athletic had a good piece over the weekend talking about Steele and Thompson and how they're really kind of cornerstone pieces for the Cubs pitching staff going forward. And you really do see that. I think Steele is definitely a starter 100%. I think Thompson's a starter, but he was so good coming out of the bullpen that I could see him coming out of the pen. Obviously, if you've got a guy that's got starter stuff, you want him to be a starter. But do you think he sticks as a starter, or do you think there's any chance they could put him back in the pen?
Yeah, I think it depends on a few things, and Edward Alzolay, whether I know he's out in Arizona right now, whether he ends up coming back, and I said this on here that I still feel like his best role is as a reliever. But one thing that I think it was both I want to make sure I give credit correctly. I don't know if it's both Sahadev Sharma and Patrick Mooney on that one. I know a lot of times they collaborate. Like I was reading, I actually have the window open alongside this right now. Their latest on a couple of the guys, Matt Mervis and a couple others down on the farm, and I used that piece about the rotation as the basis for something I just put out. And one thing they noted in there was the fact that right now Steele and Thompson are penciled in as starters. And then, we've kind of forgotten about Kyle Hendricks because he's been hurt now for a while and might not return this season. But then you got Marcus Stroman. So you got there's 4 starters right there. And to me, if you look at where their budget sits and it's projected at $92.5 million payroll, just to get back to where they are now from a budgetary perspective, you're talking about adding $54 million in new money, right? There'll be some arbitration raises, things like that, right? So whatever, but that's only to get to where they are now, which is middle of the road in Major League Baseball. If we're talking about getting to where they should be at about $200 million, now we're talking about the potential to add $100 million. Will they do that? Probably not, but they could do that and still not be a top 5 payroll. So that's what they should do. And so again, if you say we've got 4 starters in place, you can go out and add an ace for that kind of money. But what I also noted in there, I know a lot of people have talked about this, is, there's a potential to get somebody like Wade Miley back on a short term. I mean, he's an older dude, but as we've seen, you can't have too many starters, right? They didn't have enough coming into this season, and a lot of those guys were hurt. But I do think, again, Thompson. So if you get Miley back, hoping that that's something that can happen. If you go out and sign an ace, like, again, I wrote this earlier, not in this piece, but another one, like I would do unspeakable things to see Jacob deGrom in a Cubs uniform, and then wait for Ohtani to get out of his deal and go get him. And I know a lot of people are like, he's hurt, whatever. But I'm like, hey, you got to swing big. The thing with deGrom, though, is I don't think you're talking about a dude because the injury history, because the age. He's going into his age 35 season next year. He's not a dude who's going to be commanding a 10-year deal. I think you can give him a max year. Like, what the hell, man? If you got $100 million to spend, let's go balls out, beat the Scherzer deal, 3 years, $135 million. That's $45 million a year. Wild stuff, but it's only 3 years. Give him an opt-out after the second year. You're not locked in anything long-term. You still have $50 million left that you go add you go add Carlos Correa and other players, right? Now you do that, and now you let that 5th spot, whether that be Thompson or Miley or whatever, right? Look at any Caleb Killian. You could stretch out to a 6-man rotation. You could have piggybacks. Somebody's going to get hurt. You've got somebody else to come up. I just think getting that, they need an ace. And I would love to see that. Or the one thing Tom Ricketts, he echoed, I'm sure somebody wrote the statement for him that he provided to ESPN, but it talked about having the player cap or player currency, right? Prospect currency, which is the word Jed Hoyer used. Obviously, they're all speaking from the same Bible or singing from the same hymnal, whatever. And I think you've got the potential to trade a few of those guys. So whether you want to go after Shane Bieber with the Guardians, right? You get a little bit younger, whatever. But, and the thing is, and as is noted on here, though, is the other reason I like deGrom is like, that's going to be a huge contract, $45 million a year, maybe $50 million a year. But guess what? Hayward's money falls off after next year.
Yeah, exactly.
There's half of it right there coming back. Hendricks' money falls off after that. So it becomes, it's not burdensome even next year, and it becomes even less so in subsequent years. And I think for somebody like deGrom, I think he'd be willing to bet on himself. And we look at the huge contract Max Scherzer signed. He signed that going into his age 37 season. If you give deGrom that monster deal, give him an opt-out after 2 years, if he pitches as well as he's capable of, he could still opt out heading into his age 37 season, which is, again, what Scherzer was able to still command that deal. So, I mean, he could still flip that into it. And Scherzer's pitching as well as ever. DeGromson's coming back. If Jacob deGrom's healthy, he's the best pitcher on the planet, period. I think it's him and a gap, honestly, between the next one. But it's a matter of being healthy, and that's where the risk is.
And that's been his problem, right? I mean, he hasn't – when has he been healthy for an entire season?
It's been I think he was in
a few years.
19 he was healthy in previous 20 was a short season. Last year he he only threw like 90 innings or so, and this year he missed up until the start of the month here. So
I think a lot of DeGrom's value is going to be derived from, does he stay healthy here on out?
Yeah. What does he do down the stretch? Is he able to, the Mets make a deep run? Does he stay active through that? But I think, again, that's where having 4 guys for sure right now, like you say, whatever Thompson's role is, we can still pencil him in. Do you get Miley? You've got Killian in the wings. You've got Hayden Wisniewski. You've got Ben Brown. You've got some other guys coming up. Cam Sanders, we mentioned. There's some other dudes who are kind of coming up through and in there. That gives you a whole lot of lead. So you're not risking the entire state of the franchise on this one player. Yes, that's a ton of money to commit to someone, but you're not saying if something happens with his health and if he's not there to make 35 starts a year or 30 starts a year, we're screwed. You still have a lot of these guys who can come in and fill those gaps. And that's what we saw with the Mets. Right now, the Mets obviously spent a lot more money on other players, and they have Max Scherzer in addition. But Scherzer and DeGrom were both out for a long time there, and the team was still in contention as a result. So getting them back just becomes gravy. And that's something I think that's where the Cubs can get to if they play their cards right. You've got to take risks. You can't just play it safe the whole time and hope that everybody internally, A, works out developmentally, and B, stays healthy. You've got to spend that money.
To a certain degree, you kind of have to forget about the past too, because I feel like what a lot of Cubs fans tend to do is and we do the same thing, where we compare it to the past. And so you can't look back and say, all right, we're going to sign a John Lester, because that was just a unique circumstance and kind of everything fit together at the right time there. And so you might have to sign a guy that's got a little bit more risk associated with him than Lester, who had been healthy for most of his career.
Yeah, and one thing, if you look back to last year, again, when Hoyer talked about spending intelligently, and the Stroman contract is an example of this, to where it's not that they're averse to spending a lot of money. Hoyer didn't want to really, at least at the time, commit a ton of money and years. Like, he didn't want that thing that's going to age poorly in years, through 10 or whatever. But he said flat out, like, we're willing to do higher AAV on shorter deals. And so a deal like what we're talking about with DeGrom fits exactly with what makes the most, because the Hayward thing is kind of what they're scared of. It's not the annual money, it's how many years they're paying it annually, which is, again, now Carlos Correa, right? That's where I'm a little scared of somebody like Xander Bogaerts. I don't really feel like Bogaerts is going to age well into that contract. I guess you can move him over to third or whatever. I think Correa being younger makes a little bit more sense there. I don't really like the Trey Turner option, because I don't know that, to me, Turner isn't like, we stack Turner up against Nico Horner, and if you put him statistically out there and remove the names, you're not going to see some wildly different, like, oh my God, this boy Turner is so clearly better across the board. Of course, you need to have this guy in there. We'll see, but again, this having the depth in the farm system, both position player and pitchers, allows them to be a little riskier in free agency and to go out there and try to swing big. Because that's the thing. If all you're doing is, if you're trying to lay down a bunt, you can't hit it out of the park, right? It's not possible. You might reach base, you might get safely there. You might advance a runner, but you can't hit a home run if you don't swing. Yeah. So I'd like to see them do that. And it sounds, hey, I know, I totally get it, right? A lot of people do not believe anything Tom Ricketts says, and I totally understand why you wouldn't. But, he did say they're going to look to spend money and be active in free agency this offseason, not like in the future years or whatever. And if you look at the way things, the Hayward move, other things they've kind of done or haven't done, maybe speaks to me of them, looking. And look, I think the biggest thing is, we've talked for a long time about the inflection point of when are they forced to spend, right? Because the whole thing is, if they were making all the money they possibly could, if they were maxing out their revenue and their profits, then it wouldn't make sense realistically from a business perspective to maybe go spend on the product. But I believe they've reached the point I don't know if they've reached the point of the price elasticity with the little rubber band snapping, but it's got to be pretty close, man, with everything they've got going on with the reduction in season tickets. And at the end of the day, like, the sports book is cool, but how many degenerates?
No, it's not.
It's not right. But how many degenerates are going to show up, right, and hang out at the Cubs sports book because it's the cool place to be in the off season? Or if the team is losing 100 games and hasn't committed meaningfully to a winner, are you really getting enough people to come in there and spend their money in a sports book just because it's attached to Wrigley? Like,
my thing with the sports book is you can do all that stuff online now. So I just don't understand the physical, like a place that you have to go to place bets. I mean, it's not Vegas. It's never going to be Vegas. And so that's where I don't get the whole sports book thing. I think, to me, that's going to end up turning into just more of a sports bar.
And Lord knows there's enough of those in and around Wrigley Field now. Like, that's what's the differentiation? Because I mean, it's not like it is. Hey, sports books are cool for if you do want to sit there, even if you're not a gambler. I mean, it is kind of neat to have like all the games up there, but it's also weird to be like, if I'm going to Wrigley Field, I want to be at Wrigley. I want to go to the game, right? I don't need to have a giant bank of televisions and the bar in the place, because if I'm there, like, why the hell would I take the time and the effort and the cost to go there and then just be adjacent to the game and not go to the game like that? I don't understand I understand what they're trying to do.
And then why would you leave your seats to go and place a bet?
Right, when you can just do it from your phone.
Just do it on your phone. Yeah. Assuming that maybe they shut down Wi-Fi at Wrigley, and it has improved over the years, but perhaps it's going to be worse once the sports book opens up. Who knows? It'll be interesting to see. You talk about third base, and something that I was going to mention that then I think the Jedi of Chicago mentioned it right when I was thinking it, is Correa could move to third base. And so that seems to be, I mean, the Cubs need a third baseman. They've had Christopher Morel in there for a couple games over the past week. He hasn't looked particularly great at third, although that is his natural position. I just think he hasn't played third for a while, so he's probably a little rusty over there. You could definitely stick him at third base, but I think if you're talking about signing somebody, a bat that can really come in and make a big impact, Carlos Correa makes the most sense. I do not think you move Nico Hoerner off of shortstop. There's no improvement to be made there. And if you look, you mentioned looking at stats, comparing Trey Turner side by side to Nico Hoerner, you can do the same thing to Correa. And I actually think Nico has better numbers this season. And so I think Correa makes much more sense at third base. And then Madrigal at second, to the extent that Madrigal is the same guy we're seeing right now, and he continues to be that guy. And then you just kind of have to figure out first base.
Yeah, and I mean, I think as I'm kind of looking at the comments here, so I'm sharing. Just I want to address that, but I'll share some here on Ryan Jensen because he has made some. I know some people say it's suggested, but it's not been suggested that he's made. Like, he has definitely made some major changes. This is what we talk about developmentally. We talk about a guy who went on the development list for a while to make some very significant changes to his arm stroke. He had a very long. I mean, he would pull the ball almost down to his back ankle. It looked like and then come over with his very long arm stroke. They shortened that up significantly, and he's gotten a lot better. So I shared in there a post that we had from a while back from Greg Huss over at the site that could help you a little bit. If you're looking for a little bit more detail on there, but that's another example of some of the things that the Cubs can do there. So, I mean, again, if we're looking at first base, there are some things they could do. I continue to stump for Matt Mervis. 93 RBIs, I think 33 doubles. What is he at? 24 homers now, something like that. And being a lefty, I know like scouts don't like the guy very much because they feel like he's a little bit stiff. But I'm saying, well, he was a pitcher. He's a right-handed pitcher and a really good hitter at Duke. So we're talking two-way there. I think he actually moves a lot better than than what some of this that's cool. Okay, great. Scouts, you can say that, but look what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, Mervis, to me, this Mervis situation feels a lot like the Braylon Marquez situation back in, was that 2019, where it was like, just bring him up and put him in, and they didn't, and he got in like the last game for like an inning. And it feels like kind of a similar situation. It's just like, we just want to see what he looks like. Just bring him up and put him in. So obviously there's a 40-man crunch, but I think that can be resolved pretty. You can DFA.
Well, Schwindel and Bodie, both done. There we go. And I mean, neither of those guys has a role at this point. I mean, I think the fact that the Cubs were, and that was, let's not forget, that was the second time Schwindel has been optioned. The issues with Schwindel, not left-handed, no power, like none. And
yeah,
I would love, I know Alfonso Rivas has just absolutely raked at AAA.
Which is so bizarre.
Yeah, but
it's just killing it.
But here's the thing: if everybody who hit well at AAA also hit in the majors, there'd be a hell of a lot fewer players at AAA. Or not.
Zach McKinstry is a perfect example.
You bounce back and forth, and there's a reason for that in a couple levels. Some of that's mental. Again, I keep going back to the Votto quote, right? Everything is provided for you to be able to succeed at the major league level, but there are some things. Some guys get imposter syndrome, and they, man, how am I up here? I don't belong here. And it gets in your head, and it's a different deal. And that just simply isn't a problem for them in the minor leagues.
Yeah.
But if you get someone who can come up and who can hit, that's all Mervis has done at every level, this season, and he just continues to do it. I know there's concern. Will there be too much chase? Will there be whatever? But the dude has a ton of raw power, and that's one thing we talk about. Left-handed hitter, ton of power. Those are two things the Cubs lack. Significant. That's half the reason, or 90% of the reason they picked up Reyes, is because he's got a ton of pop. Even though he's right-handed, they were willing to add that. Hoyer has talked about having to add it. So you have someone who provides both of those. At the very least, you've got a dude who works as a strong side platoon player, right? Because he's left-handed. Maybe he doesn't face lefty hitters. Maybe you use Reyes as a DH in some of those spots. And, Mervis can DH and play first base, move back and forth. But you have a clear need at that spot. If you can address it with a guy who costs you next to nothing, then that allows you to then spend that money. And that's where I talk about, like, where can you, kind of fill in these spots so that you can devote the money that you've got to spend. And they should have a lot of it, right? But where can you best spend that in terms of spots that you really need? I'd love to see them go get Correa, because even if he doesn't, and as wild as this sounds, man, Nick Madrigal has been hitting pretty well. There's absolutely zero power, and there never will be, but he's doing now exactly what he was advertised as being. Give me Correa at third, keep Horner at short. Madrigal becomes your contact bat then. And Correa's contact numbers are really good, especially if we compare him to like Javier Baez and what we're kind of used to there. But now you've got across there. And if Mervis is the guy who, I said this about Patrick Wisdom before, if you had a lot of contact bats across the rest of the infield, you can afford to have a guy who's got more swing and miss in his profile, or that you maybe believe could have that, because now you've got him there for the pop specifically. Anything else is gravy, but that's balanced out by Madrigal. And, again, Horner, not going to be huge pop, but clearly he's shown extra base power. Now you've got Correa over there. You can fill in some stuff in the outfield. I feel like there's room for some of this with what we see, and you want to look at those results. And if you can save a little bit of money, I'm not saying you save it because, we got to put more money in the owner's pockets, but if you can get a guy who's on a rookie deal versus having to go out and pay a ton of money for one, makes a lot of sense, man. It just fits. It checks the boxes. Like, let's see if this works. Let's see if he can hit major league pitching. And if so, that's a hell of a nice improvement for them.
Yeah, and who else has been playing really well since the break? Yan Gomes. Leads the team with a 199 WRC plus. Just crushed a home run yesterday, 420 feet. And they've got him on a 2-year deal, right? With a club option in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
And so, while who knows what's going to end up happening with Wilson Contreras, still would love to see him stay because I think he's a great DH. And you could throw him in the outfield if you need it. I mean, it's going to be a little while until some of these younger guys get up there, and you never know what's going to end up happening with Hap. But I mean, he's playing really well. And so if you look at the future, you got kind of the foundational pieces would be obviously Steele and Thompson, as your starters. The bullpen, there seems to be a lot of options there. Christopher Morel, Seiya Suzuki, Ian Happ. I don't know if he's part of the future, or Wilson Contreras. He's definitely part of next year. Nelson Velasquez has been playing really well. Nico Horner and Madrigal have been playing really well. And then you talk about bringing up someone like Mervis. And then you've got Jan Gomes behind the plate who's been playing well. It feels like the Cubs should be competing for the division next year if they make just a few moves. If you add Correa to that, and then you go out and get a guy like DeGrom or just anybody who's, any of the solid options that are out there from a pitching perspective, obviously DeGrom would be the best. You've got a team that should win the NL Central.
Yeah, and as noted, right?
Stroman, Hendricks.
They could go out and let's say they spend. It sounds like a huge number, but $75 to $100 million in free agency, which again, while it sounds like a lot, would still put them well below our raises, whatever, but they'd be under $200 million total. That, first of all, that builds you a very competitive team. Do I think they'll really go all out and sign 2 top-tier big-ticket free agents? No, I don't think that'll happen. But there clearly is a path that they could do it. But you do that, and then you've got another minimum. You'd have, unless they extend Hap, but let's assume they don't, and let's assume they have not extended Contreras. You've got Hayward's money falling off, Hendricks' money falling off, Hap's money, which would probably be about $10 million for next year, falling off. There's another $40 million, give or take, for the following offseason, not to mention, again, whatever else happens out there. So they don't need that. They would not hamstring themselves at all. They could add 2 monster contracts this offseason and still have plenty of flexibility moving forward. And I think that's the direction they need to go. If you do add those 2, you fill in some spots around them. And let's not forget, right? I mean, you could have Brendan Davis. He's supposed to be playing in some ACL games coming up here now. That'll be coming along. Again, we're seeing some of these pitchers who could be coming up. And I like the idea of bringing some of those guys up as like we saw with Alzolay, like we saw with Steele and Thompson. You can bring them along. They don't have to be starters right out of the gate. Bring them along as swingmen, as long relievers, and let them cut their teeth that way. And then you figure that out. You can work them in the following season after Hendricks is likely gone. So, and Stroman perhaps as well. So you've got that room, and now you're not just saying, oh, it all has to happen now. You've stair-stepped it such that you've started that base, and now you're able to build on that and grow with it into the future and build in the flexibility that wasn't there when this stuff sort of happened that first time around. I think it'll be interesting. But monster contracts it limits calling up minor league hitters, but one of those is somebody who you expect to be a cornerstone of it. You can't have every minor leaguer come up and all of them succeed. It simply doesn't happen. The other thing it allows you to do is you say, we've got this guy penciled in here at short, third, second, whatever that spot's going to be. And you say, we've got 5 other middle infielders who are going to be ready within the next 2 years. Guess what? You're not going to have spots for all those guys regardless of who you sign. So having that certainty, which the Cubs had when they traded Gleyber Torres, because they had Addison Russell and because they had Javier Baez, that's what enabled them to get the closer. And there's all kinds of problematic people involved in this statement here, but to go get a Aroldis Chapman, and then that enabled them to get to the World Series, right, and to win. So there are moves you've got to make, and then there are subsequent moves on the back of that they can't keep all these prospects. That's a part of that 40-man crunch. It's not just about who do you protect from the Rule 5 draft. It's who do you end up moving to get someone else that you need in another spot. So it's, in addition to spending big money in free agency, they're probably going to have to go out and make some kind of a trade splash because they've got to clear up some of that glut somehow.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, but we'll be here checking it out, filling everybody in. The folk show. So the Cubs go and they play the Nationals. A little bit of kind of a respite from reality, I guess, because things are going to get real soon. So it's been enjoyable, this last few weeks, because the Cubs haven't really played anyone. They played the Cardinals and got swept. But outside of the Cardinals, they've played exceptionally well, or pretty well. I don't know if you'd want to say exceptionally well, but they've won series. They've won, 3 series in a row. They play the Nationals, and you would expect them to win this series, with the first game coming 6:05 p.m. tonight from Washington. And then they play Baltimore, Baltimore's been playing well. I haven't checked in on them lately, but they've been playing pretty well. But then things get real. The Brewers, the Cardinals, the Brewers, the Blue Jays. And that's just to finish out August. And then they play the Cardinals again to begin September. So it's going to get a little rough, but then it gets a little easier after that. So, I don't know. It's like, the thing is that, the Cubs aren't going to be able to win even half of these games coming up. You wouldn't expect them to, right? What's going to happen with Thompson? Do you think they're going to limit him and kind of pull him out early? He's pitched 129 innings or so once in his career. I think it was like 2018, and he's right at 100 innings right now. And just the way that he's looked, it's like there's no reason to risk injury to him. Do you think they're going to keep him in there, or what do you think is going to end up happening there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I could see them kind of, it's like putting a governor on him to an extent, and whether that's capping him.
Maybe like 4 or 5 innings max.
Yeah, whether you do it that way, set him up with a piggyback type of guy. Maybe you lower the pitch count a little bit, and maybe it's, maybe it's 70 or 75 pitches. Maybe it becomes lower there. Because I think really I know a lot of people get freaked out about pitch counts, and it's, again, it has a lot more to do with how many are you throwing in a given inning. Because 70 pitches thrown. Now, this is highly unlikely unless you're Greg Maddux, but if you threw 70 pitches in 7 innings, that's only 10 pitches an inning. That's way less stressful than pitching 70 in 3 innings.
Yeah.
Right. Just because of the volume per inning. And obviously, if you're pitching them in that if you're throwing that few pitches per inning, you're throwing a bunch of strikes. You're getting a bunch of quick outs on contact, and it just becomes much quicker. So I wonder, again, do we see more of do we get more of a look at Caleb Killian, right? That he's been looking pretty good. I mean, Dakota Mekas isn't protected right now, but he's been pitching really well. We're seeing Ben Leeper throw well lately. He had a really good outing recently. So do we start seeing some of these guys come up and kind of start to get more of a preview? I'd like to see them again. Maybe bring Killian up and let him piggyback with Thompson or something like that, and give him 2 to 3 innings apiece. And look at them as a combined starter. So, I think they're probably dialing back.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've got 3 against the Nationals coming up, and then a game against the Orioles. Not quite sure how we're going to squeeze a show in there, because there are 2 back-to-back day games, which is always kind of tough. But we'll figure it out, and we'll let you guys know how we'll circle back. But in the meantime, hopefully the Cubs get a sweep here over Washington. We'll circle back after that.
Sounds good. See you, everybody.
Cool. Talk to you.